It is the morning of the 1998 Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne, and Michael Schumacher is sitting in the Ferrari garage looking at a gap he cannot explain. The Williams FW20 that had beaten Ferrari in 1997 is gone, replaced by a new car whose Renault engine partnership has ended and whose Mechachrome customer unit is producing perhaps 40 horsepower less than the Ferrari V10. The Benetton that had threatened him in the mid-1990s is no longer a frontline operation. By every rational assessment made in the paddock over the preceding winter, 1998 should be the year Ferrari's accumulated development finally produces a championship. What Schumacher sees instead in the first qualifying session of the new season is a McLaren that is 1.5 seconds faster than his car, not half a second, not a second. 1.5 seconds on a lap of 1 minute 30 seconds, that is a deficit of exactly 1%, a number so large that the Ferrari engineers, when they see it on the timing screens, check the data twice before accepting that it is real. By the time you understand what Adrian Newey had done to the McLaren MP4/13 across the preceding 12 months and what happened at the final race of the 1998 season at Suzuka in November, you will understand why this car, which won 9 races, produced a world champion, and ended the closest championship fight of the post-turbo era, is the least discussed dominant car in modern Formula One history. This is the McLaren MP4/13, and it began not with a design decision, but with a phone call. Adrian Newey had won 3 Constructors' Championships with Williams in 1992, 1993, and 1996, and had been the primary aerodynamic intelligence behind cars that had defined their respective eras. His departure from Williams in late 1996, following a dispute with the team's management structure, was the most significant personnel movement in Formula One since Gordon Murray had crossed from Brabham to McLaren a decade earlier. Ron Dennis understood what he was acquiring. Newey arrived at McLaren in August 1997 with 1 season remaining on a Williams contract that prevented him from contributing to the 1997 car. He spent that year doing what he had always done when not constrained by an immediate production deadline. He studied the regulations. Specifically, he studied the new regulations that the FIA had introduced for 1998, regulations that represented the most significant technical reset since the banning of active suspension in 1994. The 1998 technical regulations reduced car width from 2 meters to 1.8 meters and mandated a return to grooved tires. 4 grooves cut into the front and rear tire contact patches, reducing the available rubber in contact with the road surface and, by FIA calculation, reducing cornering speeds to levels more compatible with circuit safety standards. The regulation writers had designed the changes to slow the cars and to reduce the aerodynamic complexity that wider cars had permitted. What they had not fully anticipated was the effect of the narrower bodywork on the aerodynamic design space. A narrower car meant a narrower front wing. A narrower front wing meant less total front downforce from the primary front aerodynamic surface. Every team on the grid faced the same constraint. What Newey understood, and what his rivals were slower to grasp, was that the narrower front wing created an opportunity in the airflow management between the front wing and the side pods, a channel whose characteristics changed significantly when the car's width was reduced and whose exploitation required the specific kind of total system aerodynamic thinking that Newey had been developing since his Williams years. The MP4/13 side pod geometry was the first visible evidence of what Newey had found. Where rival cars retained side pod shapes broadly similar to their 1997 predecessors, adapted for the narrower bodywork but not fundamentally reconceived, the McLaren side pods were undercut dramatically, their lower surfaces shaped to accelerate airflow toward the rear diffuser in a manner that the narrower bodywork made possible for the first time. The front wing end plates were designed not merely to generate downforce, but to direct the front wheel wake, the turbulent air shed by the rotating front tires, away from the side pod inlets and toward the outer edges of the floor. Every element of the car's aerodynamic architecture was designed around the management of airflow from front to rear as a single continuous system rather than as a collection of individual components, each optimized in isolation. The total downforce figure was not, by itself, exceptional. What was exceptional was the efficiency, the ratio of downforce generated to drag produced, and the consistency of that ratio across the range of attitudes and speeds the car encountered during a lap. The Mercedes F0100G engine that powered the MP4/13 was, in the estimation of the independent technical community that studied Formula One power units during this period, the second most powerful normally aspirated V10 on the grid in 1998 behind the Ferrari 047. The power deficit to Ferrari was real, estimated at between 15 and 25 horsepower across the rev range in race specification. What the Mercedes unit provided that its raw power figures did not capture was dimensional compactness and a low center of gravity installation that Newey's chassis design had been built around from the beginning of the project. The engine's external dimensions allowed a rear suspension geometry that no Ferrari-powered car of the era could replicate, and that geometry produced rear aerodynamic characteristics, specifically the behavior of the rear diffuser across the car's yaw angle range, that were measurably superior to those of the Ferrari 310B that Schumacher had driven to second place in the 1997 championship. The car's weaknesses were real. Its braking stability, the tendency of the rear to step out under heavy braking in the final meters before a corner, required both Mika Häkkinen and David Coulthard to adapt their driving styles across the early races of the season. The issue was never fully resolved. It cost both drivers positions at specific corners on specific circuits throughout the year. But in a car that was 1.5 seconds faster than the opposition in Melbourne, a braking stability deficit that cost 0.3 of a second at one corner per lap still left a performance margin that Ferrari could not close. Stay with this, because the internal dynamic between the two McLaren drivers in 1998 is the story within the story that the championship result obscures. Häkkinen and Coulthard were teammates in the most straightforward technical sense. Identical cars, shared data, collaborative engineering relationship with the team. They were not equals in the championship context, and both of them knew it. Häkkinen had won the final race of the 1997 season at Jerez, his first Formula One victory, taken after years of near misses and a near-fatal accident at Adelaide in 1995 that had required trackside surgery to save his life. He came to 1998 with something that Coulthard, who was the more naturally consistent qualifier in the early part of the season, did not yet have: the specific psychological certainty that comes from having won a Formula One Grand Prix from pole position in a championship-relevant car. Coulthard won in San Marino in round 4 and in Monza in round 14. In the races he did not win, he was frequently faster than Häkkinen in qualifying. The internal competition between them imposed a pressure on both drivers that the car's performance advantage over the field could not neutralize. The 1998 championship was decided in its essential structure by a single mechanical failure and a single driver error, both of which occurred to Häkkinen and both of which he overcame. At the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, a left rear tire failure while leading with 6 laps remaining cost him certain victory. At the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa, a race he had been leading comfortably, he collided with Coulthard under lapping circumstances that produced one of the most bitter post-race confrontations in McLaren's history and handed Schumacher a victory that kept the Ferrari championship challenge mathematically alive into the final rounds. Häkkinen's response to both incidents was not visible in his public statements, which were measured to the point of opacity. It was visible in his lap times. In the 7 races following Spa, he drove with a precision and an absence of error that the data from those events examined in retrospect identifies as among the most consistently controlled performances of his career. Schumacher arrived at the Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuka for the season finale, having won 3 of the preceding 5 races. He needed to win in Japan and needed Häkkinen to finish third or lower to take the championship. The race began in a manner that made the scenario plausible. Schumacher took the lead from pole position. Häkkinen ran second. On the formation lap, Schumacher stalled. Under the regulations of the era, a driver who stalled on the formation lap was required to start from the back of the grid. Schumacher rejoined in 22nd position. His recovery drive from last to third in the closing stages before a tire failure ended his race entirely produced some of the most discussed overtaking moves of the decade, but it did not produce the result he required. Häkkinen won the race. He won the championship by 14 points. He crossed the line and stopped the car on the circuit, climbed out and sat on the grass beside the track with his head in his hands. The gesture was not despair. It was a man who had spent 12 months in a car fast enough to win everything and uncertain enough to lose everything, finally, at the last possible moment, at rest. The MP4 13 won 9 races from 16 starts. Its successor, the MP4 14, won 7 races in 1999 and gave Häkkinen his second consecutive championship. The aerodynamic philosophy Newey had introduced in 1998, total system airflow management built around the specific constraints of the new regulations, was copied in varying degrees of fidelity by every team on the grid across the following 2 seasons. Ferrari's response was the F399 of 1999, which incorporated sidepod undercut geometry directly derived from what Newey had produced at McLaren. The regulation writers had intended the 1998 changes to slow the cars and reduce aerodynamic complexity. They had instead created the conditions for the most significant aerodynamic leap of the naturally aspirated era, a leap taken by one team 12 months before its rivals understood what they needed to copy. Adrian Newey left McLaren in 2006 and joined Red Bull Racing, where he would produce the RB6, RB7, RB8, and RB9, 4 consecutive constructors' championship-winning cars of increasing dominance. The MP4 13 remained, in his own description in later interviews, the car in which he first had the resource, the manufacturing capability, and the regulatory opportunity to express the total system aerodynamic philosophy fully. Every car he built afterward was a refinement of principles the MP4 13 had demonstrated. In Melbourne in March 1998, on the first morning of a new season with new regulations that every team had spent the winter studying, Newey's car was 1.5 seconds faster than the second-best machine on the circuit. That gap did not close for 9 months. It closed only when Michael Schumacher stalled his Ferrari on a formation lap in Japan, and the championship that had been the MP4/13's from the first qualifying session of the year was finally formally confirmed. If this is the kind of engineering story that brought you here, subscribe. It is how this channel keeps producing the history behind the results. Leave a comment. Is the MP4/13 the most underrated dominant car in modern Formula One history, or does another machine make a stronger case? Next time, we go inside the team that built its championship car around a regulation that every rival had misread and won the title before anyone else understood what they had done wrong.